Good evening. This podcast, we're going to talk about the House of the Man again, and we're going to focus tonight on the hunter. And that's going to lead us into a discussion about addictions and being in the head versus being in the heart, the significance of that. We're continuing our overall conversation about the detoxing of some of the negative things out here and getting into the highest and best version of ourselves, getting into some of this Tantra stuff and truly being able to, work these energies so that we, are doing some of this supernatural stuff that we talk about. So, I mean, the discussion tonight really is we're getting more specific and we're not talking about broad general concepts, but specific things people are dealing with day to day. Okay, so the House of the Man is coming from the book Awakening the Master Masculine. That's talking about the four archetypes of the man, which are the warrior, the healer, the hunter, and the eagle. These are the four archetypes of, elemental masculine energy, organic masculine energy. That's, been around a couple of thousand years at least. In this particular case, we're talking about the hunter archetype because that's the archetype dealing with money issues the most. This is sort of pivoting around that. So the healer and the ego deal with money, but in different, in sort of a secondary kind of a way. The hunter's, he's the provider, he's a hunter, he's dealing with money more directly. So that this conversation is about money. This conversation is about the hunter. This conversation is about the house of the man. And basically, we're looking at certain situations going on today now, and we're trying to relate that to stuff that's happening. In other words, we're trying to take concepts over here and show you how it plays out in daily life over here, right? So the conversation is mainly directed at men in terms of the language, but it's directed at both men and women if you really stop and think about it. So, it seems like these tips are only for men. No. It won't take much imagination to understand how to apply this for women to the house of the woman, to the treasure chest. Right? So you just got to flip the script a little bit and look at it from the opposite direction. You'll see it pretty clear. And in some of the conversations that we've had about the treasure chest, it's going to be easy to make that conversion. So, okay, the specific outer issue that the hunter is going to find, the man that he's going to find when he gets out into the world. So he's learned these concepts in Grand Trine. Now he's out in the world. What's he going to see? He's going to see women or a specific woman who are present in their heads too much. They're way in their heads too much. And they're carrying too much masculine energy, a little too much masculine energy. Not enough feminine energy, a little too much masculine energy. I'm talking regular women, with goals, objectives, trying to do what they're trying to do. And we can criticize them, not very helpful though. If you see this and you recognize this woman has too much masculine energy, or she's in her head too much and she's not in her heart too much, uh, the, a better posture, if you want to deal with that, is to try to help the lady, right? Now, some guys that don't want to be bothered with her. That's what it is. But if you're going to really deal with this, then there's a proper way to do that. Um, First thing is to understand, okay, when we're looking at her mental activity and what she's thinking, what her thought process is, her false beliefs and stuff like that, it's kind of important, but no, that's not the main way that you need to deal with this situation. Look instead at the matters that's affecting her heart. So what I'm saying is we're trying to get solutions here. We're trying to deal with a dysfunctional situation here. Don't worry about as much the thinking. What's going on in the head? What's her behavior? What's her, uh, what's the patterns like? What is she saying? Is she miscommunicating? All of that is a little bit important, not that important. No. The fastest route to a high value life is to concern yourself with the frequency and the vibration of her heart space, her heart energy. And of course, this is true of women examining men in similar situations. So we're trying to deal with something. We're out in the world, we've learned all this stuff, we're out in the world, we see something happening, and we're like, okay, now what do I do? And what we're saying is that in certain particular cases, take your focus away from what you see in front of you. Take your focus away from what she's doing at that particular moment. Take your focus away from the mental process that she's engaged in. No. Focus on the heart and the fact that she's not typically in her heart. She's not present in her heart. Now, how does this show up in daily life? If you're going to break it down even further, it shows up as addictions. And in the case of the woman, it shows up as an inability to focus on what is important. So addictions, mild to severe. And of course, men have addictions too. We're going to get to that. The other thing that's almost as bad as the addictions is this inability to focus on what is important. She keeps going off on all these tangents. She's in her head and she's focusing on all of this stuff that not going to help. In other words, she's going to solve the problem. She's going to think herself through this. She's going to figure stuff out. She's going to listen to this and she's going to do that. And it's just going to dig her deeper in the hole because she's not in her heart. She's not in the right heart space. Addictions are a common source of excess masculine energy. It looks different when it's involving the man. In other words, if the man doesn't have the proper feminine polarity and he's got too much yin, not enough yang, he's going to have a problem with his masculinity. It's going to look different than this. It's going to be there, but it's going to look different from this. In the female version, you know, it's going to make addictions worse. Excuse me. And unfortunately, this couldn't come at a worse time. Because what's happening in the world? Never in modern history has there been a greater spectrum of addictions and the percent of the population involved in these addictions. Never has it been easier to become addicted, to get our hands on these substances. Never has it been easier and more acceptable to abuse them. We're talking about weed, marijuana, painkillers, opioids, porn. It's an addiction. I mean, if you're watching porn, that's one thing. If you're addicted, that's another thing. Cell phones, big addiction. Why can't we put our cell phones down? Cell phones are necessary today, but a lot of people are addicted and act like it's normal. It's not normal. Junk food, big, 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 big addiction. Prescription drugs, not the kind of addictions you were thinking about, were you? There's a bunch of that stuff. We can keep going. You know who you are. So let's look at, if the male is trying to deal with the female, he's encountering this female, she's got these addictions, and he's looking at it on a daily basis. She's going to present as being very confident, probably somewhat attractive, maybe. She's going to want to get his attention, and she's going to try to get him to think along the way that, she's hoping that he's going to be thinking. And she's going to try to get him to not notice and to ignore the fact that she's addicted and she's exhibiting addictive behavior. He's going to want to not do, he's not going to, she's going to go through some trouble to keep the man from taking notice of the fact that she's got some addictions. The other thing that she's going to do is she's going to be like, she cannot seem to focus on the stuff that she claims are important in her life. And she does not want the man to get involved in it. In other words, she does not want him to notice that she's having these problems. And of course, he can't really help the situation if he doesn't notice, if he doesn't understand it. So the first thing we have to address, if we're a man, and we're encountering this situation, okay, we started out talking about, okay, who's the hunter? We started out talking about the fact that women are in their head too much. We started out talking about the fact that women are running around with all this masculine energy. And then it keeps breaking it down, breaking it down, breaking it down until we're saying, I'm out here in the world, I'm looking at the woman, and I'm seeing a woman who's showing signs of addictions, not being able to focus on what is important in her life. What do I do? First of all, the male posture is like, half these guys are just as dysfunctional as the women. So if he presents as entitled, disconnected, unwilling to take responsibility, seeking to do the least. I mean, a lot of these guys display the same addictions as the women do. How are you going to help that situation? So the first thing the guy's got to do is, he's got to separate himself from the guys that can help from the guys that can't. If he's going to help, he can't be one of these guys in pretty much the same boat she's in. Before a man can help solve her problem, he's got to be living the solution. When you look at him, you see what the solution looks like. So in the venerable 7-star system, it speaks to the 4 elemental life variables, which are money, sex, relationships, and tribe. And in past videos, in past podcasts, we've addressed this 7-star system, which is a small component of some of these programs we're currently ongoing. This 7-star system is one of the key systems in Grand Trine. So this discussion we're having fits into that in terms of how it plays out, in terms of, you got this issue, women being in their head too much, being in their masculine too much, not really being present in their heart, things like that. So we're talking about money right now. We're talking about money and these programs that we have in Grand Trine for dealing with money, the spiritual entrepreneur, all that kind of stuff like that. And to be able to understand how this works, in terms of, these concepts, but how do you apply them? Before we get to the money, let's look at sex and let's look at relationships to understand the tactic that we're talking about today, right? In other words, we talked about the problem. Here's what it looks like out on the streets. And then the very short and skinny version of what solutions look like, what demands, what that looks like, right? So you say, okay, let's look at sex. The first thing that you're going to say, I need to be able to have the capability of getting her out of her head. How do I get her to get into her feelings in a positive way, in a stable way, where, your emotions are not running away with you or him? So what does it take to get her into her head, out of her head and into her heart? The man has to understand that she lives in a negative trance. And, first thing he's got to do is break that negative trance. So he's got to do something shocking, something unusual. He's got to say something unusual. He's got to do something unusual. Can't follow the pattern. He's got to get her to stop being in her head. So he's got to, then engage her in such a way that she becomes emotional and goes into a mild state of trance that causes her to connect with her heart. So the only, every individual woman is different. The man is going to have to figure that out. He's going to have to make her forget what was happening that day. He's going to have to make her more or less stop focusing on what's happening and focusing on how she's feeling in a positive way. So he could use the, some of the stuff that you learned in Grand Trine. You can use the pulse technique to, put his hands on her someplace, innocent or semi-innocent, and help her to feel that pulse that's going to break her out of that that feeling of feeling I'm in a negative situation. I don't like this. I feel like I'm not going to be able to solve my problems in life. I'm feeling like I'm failing and that there's not much hope of me solving this situation or getting out of this situation. And so he needs to change that. And if you're looking at the thing from a sexual perspective, she needs to be aroused without triggering the things that she doesn't like: the fear of pregnancy, fear of rejection, fear of not being attractive, or whatever. He's trying to get her out of her head into her heart in a positive way. He can, use the pulse technique, or he can do things like engage just one sensory thing, like feeling, hearing, smelling, just one, and put it in a loop so she constantly just experiencing the same thing over and over to get you from thinking and into just feeling that, experiencing that. He can use one of the 5 euphorics, coffee or chocolate or liquor or something like that. Just giving you examples. He can just tease her as like, basically play, make her laugh. Very effective to get her out of her head. The central dynamic is as follows. If her panties aren't wet, don't take them off. In other words, if she's not in that trance state, if she's not in that aroused state, don't try to proceed with sex. Don't try to execute something that's not ready to be executed yet. The central concept here: if her panties aren't wet, don't take them off. In other words, it's a way of saying sexually, okay, you first got to get her into her heart, out of her head. And if you see that she's not out of her head yet, you still have work to do. Okay, we can take it out of the sexual context and put it into a relationship context. Same thing. So we're coming back to money eventually, but the same thing. We're in this situation where we got these concepts, we see these problems. Now we're taking the layers, and we say, okay, addictions, and failure to focus, and other things like that. What does the hunter do? Let's look at relationships. And again, it's when you're translating the concept into the action, you have to really follow the pattern the way that you should. So again, starting point: relationships are measured in the heart, not the head. We have the tendency to want to start logically thinking about, how is this woman, why is she doing X, Y, and Z, and how can we talk her into, how can we argue with her into doing the right thing? No, don't do that. So reason and logic are required in relationships to work, but it's not the core. In other words, you're like, you got food, right? And you want it to taste good. You're going to put some spices on it, to help the flavor come out, and you got to cook it and all. But the spices aren't everything. You got to start with the right food. You got to cook it right. There's a lot of stuff in that equation. Spices are just a small part of it. And that's how reason and logic are. Yeah, you got to have reason and logic, but it's not everything. And it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is not the thinking part of it. It's the feeling part of it. So most humans are not mature enough to comprehend the higher aspects of relationships. In other words, when we start getting into relationships, it's hard to really talk about how to execute this whole head to heart maneuver. Tantra will help you. And when we talk about Tantra, you can use Tantra to do it. But if you don't know Tantra yet, you know, what is the similar, or what is the substitute for that? That energetic thing to get her into her heart, out of her head, and into a posture where she's solving her problem and it's not making it worse. She's solving her addiction. She's not making it worse. So, if you're talking about really getting into the concept of what's going on in relationships, well, you need to deal with things like combined frequencies, which is something, most people don't really know about. We can't get into that right here. uh, the science of the spiritual hierarchies. Relationships are based on the hierarchy. So your intimate relationship really, how it's going to work is based on the spiritual relationship that you're in or you're not in. And we're not really ready to have those conversations because we can't reveal that stuff until after you've taken the courses, right? So we got to do something else. We know, of course, that relationships are won in the heart, not the head. But we also know that the nature of relationships, the nature of men and women, is that they want things to constantly be changing. They want things to be constantly new. And basically, relationships, um, people want them to some extent to be permanent, but they can't be because everything in the world is trying to change, and we're constantly changing. Therefore, relationships tend to always fail. In other words, the relationships, there might be a lot of good stuff underneath that foundation, but relationships are constantly being pulled apart because everything is constantly changing and we're constantly changing. But, if we have our own good nature, our attributes and everything, then we understand that sometimes even the relationships are naturally pulling apart. We have to artificially keep them together, especially, things like kids. You got to hang in there for 16, 17 years till those kids get to a certain age before you can let the forces pulling you apart actually accomplish that. So, you kind of got to understand that in this relationship thing, you've got to stay in your heart and not in your head. Therefore, when you're going through these periods, these cycles where you are being pulled apart, you got to maintain this friendship. You got to maintain this positive positiveness, even though things don't look too good right now. So you can't let that make you hate the other person, dislike the other person because they're not living up to your relationship expectations. Stay out of your head. And you're constantly saying, okay, well, we're slipping apart. She's not doing what I want her to do. Her masculine energy and her failure to get into her heart is whatever. So is she slipping out of my operating range, but I'm still happy with her. I'm still going to support her to some extent because chances are that cycle that's pulling us apart is going to push us back together again. And if we can both stay in our heart, a positive heart, then when we come back together again, we can still achieve our objectives. If we start hating each other and we start feeling like we can't trust each other because, our pledges, all our, I love you, I'm going to love you forever. Okay, but then you don't love me forever, so now I hate you. At one point in time, we liked each other. Now don't seem to. And I'm saying that you have to fight this. You got to stay in your heart, stay out of your head, Stay out of your head, boy, because you got to say, okay, she's not doing what I wanted her to do, what I expected her to do, or even what she needs to do. But I'm still staying in my heart and trying to keep her in her heart because the chances are we're going to be able to fall back in love again later in this relationship, right? As long as we don't burn our bridges right now. So I say to you, when emotions pull you apart, be kind always because it's easier to come back together that way. And that's how relationships work. Monogamy is unnatural. Monogamy is not natural. It doesn't mean it's bad. You're going to need sometimes monogamy if a woman has gone through all kinds of changes and upset and trauma and this, that, and the other. She may need monogamy for 4 or 5 years. She just may need just one. That's all she can handle right now is one guy, one penis, one situation. That's all she can do right now. Okay, that's just the way that it is. So, you might need that monogamy. So you may not believe in it. I'm not a monogamous person, but hey, I will agree to be in that situation for a time if that's what it takes. Right? So I mean the relationship variable is difficult. And he's always got to keep the woman out of her head into her heart in order to keep progressing and getting closer to whatever goal they've set. So then we come back to this whole money thing. And we recognize the relationship variable is the most difficult. And after this, the money variable is second in difficulty. We have to study it. And we say, okay, well, this Hunter guy, he's a heck of a guy. Because his goal is to be the provider. So what does that mean? What is the definition of the Hunter? Is the man who takes accountability for someone else when it's not going to help him. He's accountable for others, basically people, women and children who can't provide for themselves because they're doing other important stuff. Kids are growing up, they don't know how to provide. Oftentimes, the woman's so busy being domestic, or so busy learning her education, or so busy doing the family thing, or so busy being feminine, or so busy, with whatever things society has tasked her to do. She doesn't have time always to become an excellent provider. And if she does, oftentimes being a provider takes her further into her masculine energy, which we just said is not always good. No, not always good. So we can't say, well, how is she going to get out of this dynamic if the man is not going to be responsible for people outside of himself? He has to take accountability for someone other than himself. And he's got to take this pretty seriously. That's why this money variable thing is pretty important. And one of the rules, first of all, the man has to have a stable heart if he's going to deal with money. Next thing, one of the major rules is that stress due to money worries is a no-no. In my past relationships, I had a rule. The woman can stress out about money for 2 days a month. The other 29 days, stop it. It's not allowed. I'm very serious about that. She's allowed to stress out for money, right before the first of the month. You can stress out about money for 2 days. You can nag me, you can yell and scream, you can, bite your fingernails for 2 days. The other 29 days, I don't want to hear it. No stress over money is allowed. It does not matter who makes the money. That doesn't give you the right to stress about it. Stressing is affecting our relationship. It doesn't matter how much money we have, because I can tell you from experience, you can be making 6 figures and women still want to stress about every goddamn thing. And you're like, stop that. It doesn't matter. If you're not making enough money, there's stress over that. You're making a lot of money, then, there's stress about that. Women love to stress about money. It is so unproductive. And the only way to stop women from stressing about money is the man's got to have common sense enough not to stress about it himself. And so you have to be, you have to be performing correctly. In other words, you're making money and you've shown that you're a hustler. You have a strategy. You're not sitting around, you're doing something about the money issue. And you can see from the past the results of that, where you've had past successes, where you changed your strategy until you became successful. He's resisting stress, and he insists that she will not stress about money because that's going to take her straight into her head. And for those 29 days that she's not doing the budget and doing this kind of stuff like that, we're dealing with money, but we're not doing it in a stressful way. And so what I'm talking about is he's remaining and she's remaining in her heart, not in her head. She's not in her masculine. She's not addictive. If you allow her to be into the addictive dynamic, she's going to be in stress 31 days out of 31 days. You got to stop that. You can't stop the addiction until you stop the stress. So we have these programs, the Spiritual Entrepreneur, which is a tier 2 program. We have these programs, PRN Protocol, which is a tier 2 program, that help deal with these issues. And I encourage everybody to sign up, pay your little money. It's going to help you get this information, get these practices, learn how to energetically do what we just talked about, because you're going to see people more and more in these addictive patterns where they're pretending like they're not, but they're addicted. I mean, if you got a heroin addiction, it's going to show. Can't hide it too well. You got some of these other heavy duty drug addictions, it's going to show. You'll probably be on the street in a couple of months. So, people are going to know. But if you got addictions like what we talked about, you can still function and live with them. People aren't necessarily going to know. You need to energetically understand if the person's in their head, if they're not in their heart, how to tell when they're in this addictive personality, when they're in this addictive scenario. And if you're going to deal with them, first thing you've got to do is not be in a dysfunctional pattern. Apply what we just talked about, learn as much as you can. You can help them. You can help them. And so the same thing is true for the women. I mean, we in other topics we've dealt with the female as the one doing the healing, as the one doing the work. And we will do that. We will continue to do that again. When the female is the one, trying to fix the problem. In this particular case, we're aiming our focus toward the male, and this is the way you deal with this. And you're going to see that so often until you get to this point where you're in your heart and she's in her heart. You can't get to the next stage where you can take the next remedial step, the therapy or whatever you want to call it. Okay, I'm Master Yao. This is another installment in our program of programs. I hope you like our videos. I hope you subscribe, hit the notification, and absolutely, positively like this video. You'd better do it. Okay, good night.